Welcome everyone, welcome. I'm going to talk about fat and the relationship to cholesterol today, right? And we'll thank you for joining me. I'm in my gymnasium. I've had many happy days here and we're on a Friday afternoon, right? Great stuff. Without further ado, let's make some headway on what you should be putting in your body for those of you who've had a heart related condition. Bing. Okay. Right. There is no direct relationship between cholesterol and fat. The fat at the supermarket. It was all done with a social engineering program for many years by margarine manufacturers, the corporations who make it. I'm just going to talk a little about that now and try and explain as best I can. And we'll start with saturated fat. Now, saturated fat always comes from animals, right? It will always come from animal. It doesn't come from, right? So it doesn't come from plants or fruits, right? It's always going to be from animals, right? And while we're on that subject, when your body stores fat, it stores it as saturated fat. That's interesting. Might come back to that later. There's a lot to be said for that, right? With that said, so I grew up as a lad spreading my toast with dripping saturated fat, and the only thing that was available was butter. Now I've got some butter here, right, and I'm going to tell you a little tale of what happened with this particular manufacturer. This is a very been in the butter game for a long time. You'll recognise the colour. I've blanked off the name because I don't want to get sued. This is not people taking me to court. I don't want people come looking for me any shape or form, and I don't want to insult people, but I want to make you aware of just what goes on within your supermarket. So here we have, I blanked the name out, and we've got a very well known butter, right? And this is a butter that I don't get paid to say any of this, but this is a butter that when I use butter, this is what I use, okay? Because it's butter and it's saturated, right? Saturated with what? Haha. Carbon and hydrogen chains, right? So I'll just leave that there for a minute, right? What it is, it's a ladder of carbon, and either side there's hydrogen molecules, and that's basically it. And at one end there's a trans fatty acid, a COH, right? Carbon, oxygen, hydrogen. At one end, the trans fatty acids. Trans fatty acids and fat are one and the same. Okay, saturated. The carbon chain is full, right? The hydrogen molecules are full. Okay, you got that. No problem, right? Very simple. Saturated fat. Right? Where the problem comes is when we go to seeds like flaxseed, coconuts, olives, fruits and vegetables, vegetable oil, right? Now in nature, when nature creates an unsaturated fat, the unsaturated fat has what's called a CIS bond, and at the CIS bond the structure slightly alters because it's always missing two hydrogen atoms on one side. Now that's important. The hydrogen atoms are missing on one side. So if you can imagine the ladder of carbon, and it gets bent because it needs a CIS bond putting in there, because it's got two hydrogen atoms missing either side of the CIS bond. Okay. Now, if we're talking about an omega-3, all that means is, right, because they use the Greek alphabet. I don't know why they use the Greek alphabet, but everything in medicine and everything in, you know, it all gets complex, doesn't it? And it takes ages to work out. With that said, they use the Greek alphabet. So an omega-3 oil, right, is the far end of the chain, and it's 3 in. That's all it is. It's 3 in. Right, that's what they're talking about. Right? An omega-3 would be a mono unsaturated, because it's at the 3rd position. It is missing the hydrogen atoms. Okay? It's missing hydrogen atoms at the 3rd position. So there's a CIS bond that bends it. The double bond is a CIS bond. And so if you get to see a diagram of it, you know, I'm not one for drawing diagrams. If you get to see a diagram of it, right, it just bends slightly. It's not straight. The saturated fat is straight, right? It's full of carbon down the middle, and either side there is hydrogen atoms. Simple. The unsaturated fat, like I've just said, right, if it's an omega-3, it'll be at the 3rd position from the far end of the fat, right, and it'll be 3 positions in, and the hydrogen atoms will be missing on the one side, where there'll be a CIS bond. Remember, nature always uses a CIS bond. The reason being because your pancreas produces proteolytic enzymes, right, that have to deal with the fat. And the proteolytic enzymes and digestive enzymes produced in the pancreas recognise a CIS bond. Now, this leads us on to a problem. We've all heard of avoiding trans fat. Trans fat. Well, how did trans fat come about? Well, olive oil is great and flaxseed oil is great, but the problem is you can't spread it on bread. And a lot of people in the winter have problem spreading saturated fat, i.e. butter, on bread, because we've all been there, haven't we? It tends to break the bread up somewhat, doesn't it? Right? So a clever guy in a white coat decided to bombard a vegetable oil with hydrogen and created a trans bond. Right? The problem with a trans bonded fat is he used a big machine, and it was done at high pressure, and he bombarded it with hydrogen. It doesn't sound very palatable, does it? Well, it doesn't to me. And I'd advise you not to eat anything with hydrogenated. It's been hydrogenated. It's been bombarded with hydrogen. I advise you not to eat it, because the body does not recognise the trans bond. Okay? Now, because it doesn't recognise the trans bond and can't break it off, because it's not a CIS bond, okay, the liver produces fat to store it as a toxin. This is why we have so many young children who are obese these days. In the old days, you could have one or two young kids in the school that I remember. They'd be pretty, they'd be pretty fat, And this is no disrespect to anyone. But these days, don't there seem a rise in children who are getting fat very, very quick? Now, you always relate this to calories, I know, but this is quite interesting because it's not always related to calories, particularly when you're talking about the American junk food manufacturers, who I'm not going to mention now because I want to stick with the fats. Okay, so hydrogenated fat starts its life as vegetable oil, a form of, from nature, from fruits and vegetables, right, and gets bombarded with hydrogen into something that will spread, right. It goes from an oil to spreadable, slightly thicker, and it doesn't oxidise, so it will sit on a supermarket shelf for a very, very long period of time. Now, whilst that's great for the manufacturer, that is no good for you and me with a heart condition. Okay, this is important stuff. So this particular company realised it was losing out and losing lots and lots of money. We always come back to money, don't we? It was losing lots of money, so decided to make Summit a little bit more spreadable. And it came out with this version of a spread or a margarine. They're all the same. Spreads and margarines are all the same. They've all been bombarded at some point, right? So they jumped into the margarine game here, right? Now this happened to coincide with the cholesterol hypotheses, which I talk about extensively because I get lots of questions on it. Okay, so we've got social engineering going on across the media, telling you that this makes you fat and this clogs your artery and this gives you cholesterol problems and pushes your cholesterol levels up, right? And this is the answer, because it's lighter and it's margarine. And well, actually 10 years down the road you always find out, don't you, when some guy in a white coat has been altering the food chain somewhat, right? Now with this particular spread, margarine, with this particular one, they used rapeseed oil. They used rapeseed oil. Now I'm going to do a video on rapeseed oil because it deserves a video all of its own, right? I hope you never use anything with rapeseed oil in, because it's an inflammatory for anyone who's had a heart condition or an heart related problem. It's an inflammatory. Do not use it, and go and check your cupboards. You shouldn't be using rape. Rape was one of the first of the genetically modified seeds to be used for that purpose. I'll be talking about that extensively, okay? But this particular company mixed their butter with rape, which eventually gave them a spread, right, which is no good to you and me. Okay, so we come back to butter, right? Saturated fat, like I say, in a carbon chain with hydrogen molecules either side attached to it, completely saturated. The chain is saturated. It's a saturated fat. Simple. One of the easiest fats to break down, the easiest fat to break down for your body. And when your body stores fat, guess what? It stores it as saturated. Interesting, right? But we've been so socially engineered to think that butter is the worst thing on the planet, right? Butter is probably the way to go, right? Unless you're already using coconut butter or many of the alternatives that are around. So stay away from margarine, stay away from hydrogenated fats. Hydrogenated fats cannot be used in any shape or form by your body. They will only ever give you problems in more ways than you will ever believe.